eMarketer and Insider Intelligence's Chart of the Day newsletter helps leaders quickly understand key trend data so they can communicate insights to their teams and make sound, data-backed decisions. Visit emarketer.com/newsletters and join the thousands of subscribers who rely on our actionable charts. Hello, listeners. Today is Wednesday, June 21st. Welcome to Behind the Numbers, Reimagining Retail, an eMarketer podcast. This is the show where we talk about how retail collides with every part of our lives. I'm your host, Sarah Levo. Today's episode topic is retail media. First, let's meet today's guests. Joining me for today's episode, we have Principal Analyst Andrew Lipsman. Welcome back, Andrew. It's been a minute.
Thanks, Sarah. Good to be back.
Good to have you. And joining us for the first time on the Retail Podcast is Senior Analyst Max Willens. Hey, Max.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Let's get started with our first segment, News and Reviews, where I give the news and our guests tell me their reviews. Today's story is a June 13th story from Marketing Week titled, Trust in Supermarkets Falls to 9-Year Low as Consumers Feel Ripped Off. This data is UK specific, but I'd imagine we're seeing something similar in the US. Consumers feel grocery stores are charging more money for less. The story uses the term greedflation to describe grocery stores' continued profits amid a cost of living crisis in the UK. So, Andrew, your review of this story in 60 seconds is?
Well, it makes a lot of sense in the sense that customers are very price sensitive and they love to grumble about the price of anything going up. You know, the take that they've had on the economy amidst inflation has been that it's like, you know, the sky is falling. And it's like, actually, most economic indicators in the consumer economy are pretty good, except for that one thing, but they're very, very unhappy. In this case, I actually think they're somewhat justified because major retailers, particularly grocery retailers, and a lot of CPG brands have actually been seeing their profits increase quite a bit. So I would say it is to their benefit, and they probably are raising prices a little bit higher because they can get away with it in this environment.
Yeah, it's also like, it's anecdotal, but it's something that you see go up, right? You're buying groceries every week. You see that number go up.
Yep. That's why they shrink boxes, by the way, of cereal, because consumers are a lot more sensitive to price than they are to size and quantity.
The Cheez-It box is so much smaller right now, and I am sensitive to it. Max, your review of this story in 60 seconds is?
Yeah, I was going to lead with my outrage at the smaller size of the box of Honey Nut Cheerios in my pantry right now. I agree with everything that Andrew said, and I think that what's interesting is the sort of fact that so many of these CPG executives have been saying the quiet part loud. If you listen to the earnings calls of a number of prominent ones, they have talked about how the kind of broader macroeconomic discussion of inflation has provided cover for them to raise their prices. And some of it has been warranted, but some of it is just, you know, finding an opportunistic chance to add some cushion to their margins. And consumers aren't dumb. In fact, I see periodically, you know, clips of on TikTok and other social media, you know, people discussing their outrage at the fact that, you know, brands are choosing to do this. So I'd say there's a lot of justified upset among consumers here.
Yeah, absolutely a frustrating topic. Less of a frustrating topic, it's time for our next segment, Retell Me This, Retell Me That, where we discuss an interesting retail topic. Today's topic is retail media. It's been a minute since we checked in on retail media, those retailer-owned ad channels like Amazon search results and Kroger's in-store advertising. Retail media ad spend will pass $45 billion this year in the US, according to our forecast. Not only is growth nearly at 20% year over year, but it's actually accelerating. So Andrew, how would you sum up the current era for retail media?
Yeah, well, it's, I think, a really interesting and dynamic time. We are transitioning, I would say, from the retail media 1.0 era into the retail media 2.0 era. So the 1.0 era is basically search ads, sponsored product ads on an e-commerce website. Amazon has kind of dominated this space to, the tune of 75 or 80% of the market. And that is mostly what got us to this $45 billion mark. And it's not done yet. We're going to see a lot more search ad revenue coming in through other retailers in the coming years. But as we transition to the 2.0 era, it's about moving up the funnel and into the store. Up the funnel means display, video, and streaming TV ads, as well as in-store ads. And then into the store means starting to account for the other 85% of retail sales that are occurring in-store and not online. So the opportunity gets much bigger, but realizing the opportunity also gets a lot more complex, and there are a lot more players who get to play in it. So I think this is a very interesting and fun time as that 2.0 era starts to emerge.
Yeah, I get excited every time we talk about this. So 1.0 is like when I search leggings on Amazon and I get an ad for leggings. And then 2.0 is when I get those ads in something that I'm watching on Amazon Freevee.
Exactly right. Yep. And the searching on Amazon, right? That's the easy money. We had a playbook for this. It's called Google. And it's basically taking that Google ad and putting it on steroids because it's in a place where people are already shopping and buying. So it's going to work really well.
Okay, so next year, retail media ad spend will be $10 billion higher than it was this year at around $55 billion. Max, keeping the monster growth in mind for this year and how that's accelerating, how does 2023 look different from 2022 for retail media, both online and in store?
Well, I think that the points that Andrew made earlier are really important when you think about the growth from 22 to 23. So I think that in kind of making this transition, we are seeing a teensy bit of growing pain and adjustment in the space. So to your point, we're looking at monster growth, but I think what's really interesting, so I worked on a forecast report on retail media, which published about a month ago. And one of the things that really leapt out at me was when I compared the forecast that we had done in the spring of 22 to the forecast that we did in the spring of 23. We actually revised our growth projections for this year down by about 12%. And some of that was macroeconomic, but I think a lot of it is because this is a space that at the moment is evolving really, really fast. So just going from 22 to 23, you had companies like TikTok, like Meta, like Pinterest, like Roku, all either jumping into retail media for the first time or deepening their involvement in it. And as the sort of number of channels where you can activate retail data and media dollars has grown, it's created a lot of confusion for advertisers. And it's all confusion that they'll sort out in time. But I think we're right at the beginning of this period where retail media can mean a lot of things to an advertiser. And so they're going to have to invest some time and sweat and energy in figuring out how to make sense of it all, particularly when you think about how difficult it is to measure and compare the effectiveness of one retail media network to another. And that's really important because one of the other things that you see at the moment is a lot of advertisers, because they see how effective it is to, buy sponsored search on an Amazon or a Walmart, are expanding their investment. So the typical advertiser will be in 5 or 6 different RMNs. And if you're looking at that and you've maybe invested $1 million in all of them, it's really hard to decide, okay, but this one is actually driving better results. So next year they get 1.2 million or 1.5. So as all that stuff gets cleared out, we'll see spending accelerate still further, which is what our forecast shows.
Max raises a great point, though, about the pain points are starting to really emerge and become pronounced. And standardization, for exactly the reasons that Max is mentioning, are the case. I mean, you have to spread your spend across 5, 6 retail media networks. It's hard to do to begin with, but then also you want to make sure that you're allocating correctly based on the performance. But you might get a ROAS, or return on ad spend metric, from each of the 5 or 6 RMNs that you are buying across. And the definition that's being used could be different for every one of them, different attribution windows and all sorts of different mechanics in terms of how it's calculated. So you can't make those allocations like you need to. So an issue, standardization, a year ago was not being talked about at all. And it has quickly risen up to being maybe the number one issue being talked about from brands in the context of retail media.
Yeah, I mean, standardization was a huge issue when social media was taking off, right? Is retail media going to do a better job at resolving that than the Metas and Snaps of the world and Twitters of the world did?
Well, I think in some ways they're better positioned and worse positioned to do better, right? So on the one hand, because they are so close to the transaction, there is potentially, if executed well, a way to draw a line that's very clean and make the case that the spending in one place led to an outcome in another. The problem or the challenge is the relationship between the ad buyer and seller is a lot more complicated. If I am an advertiser and I invest a big pile of money in an ad campaign with a web publisher, and they promise me this kind of return and this number of this kind of brand lift, and it doesn't deliver, then I can pick up the phone and call the publisher's chief revenue officer and scream at him for an hour and, demand my money back, or just say, I'm never working with you again unless you make concessions. But if I'm an advertiser in a retail media network, I probably also have my product on that retailer's store shelves. I probably also have them in their circulars. And so I don't want to call and scream at them because they really play a pivotal role in the relationship that I have with my consumers. And so that level of complexity is, I think, going to have a big role in determining how this gets sorted out.
And this is why you increasingly hear brands start to talk about this as a tax. The relationship is starting to get a little bit more adversarial. Personally, and I can say this looking at it from the outside and not being on either side of the table, I think there's really a big win-win in retail media over the long run here for both retailers and brands. But because of these dynamics that Max is mentioning, it is starting to become more of a zero-sum game. And I don't think that's necessarily productive.
Yeah, it's a delicate relationship. I think we're also seeing a lot of somewhat delicate partnerships. Retail media really hinges on partnerships right now. Albertsons partnered with Omnicom. Walmart joined forces with Roku, TikTok, and Snap. Lowe's and Yahoo have a deal. I want to hear from both of you about a partnership that really stands out to each of you. Andrew, you go first.
Yeah, well, and this is one way. So taking that retailer's first-party data and connecting it to upper funnel media environments is a way to start to break free of some of these dynamics that we were just talking about. So one of the retail media networks that I've been hearing a lot about recently, very consistently, is Dollar General Media Network. Now, they don't have a big e-commerce business at all. So they almost didn't participate in the 1.0 era. I always thought that they would become a big player, and they probably still will, in-store retail media because they have a massive footprint and a lot of surfaces potentially that they could monetize in the store. But it's the audience play. It's the fact right now that they partnered with Meta to basically take Dollar General's first-party data on 90 million customers and then connect it into Meta's media, which is still, the biggest source of digital ad inventory out there for sort of upper funnel media. And I think the partnership makes a lot of sense. It's obvious. And brands really like it because of the unique audience. It's not just the scale, but it's harder to reach customers, often from lower income and or rural communities that can just be a little bit more difficult to reach otherwise. So very, very valuable audience at scale. And so it seems to be, bearing fruit, and brands are responding to it.
Absolutely. I mean, Dollar General's play is serving underserved customers, right? But those consumers are still on Facebook and Instagram.
Exactly.
So it definitely makes sense. Max, what's an example of a retail media partnership that stands out to you?
So there's two. I mean, the one that really leaps out at me is Pinterest working with Amazon and allowing Amazon to sell its inventory through its pipes. I can talk more about that if you like. But the other one that really leaps out at me is Kroger and Disney and their advertising units working together. And I find this so fascinating because I think that the interplay between CTV and retail media ad spending is going to be very complex. And I'm really, really fascinated to see how it shakes out. So if you look at the sort of, expected growth of CTV and retail media, we're expecting that retail media is going to amount to a double-digit percentage of CTV ad spending, and it's going to do so pretty quickly. But you flip it over and CTV will basically amount to just a single-digit percentage of retail media ad spending. And I just think that sort of imbalance is potentially has really huge implications. As far as this particular partnership, though, what it amounts to is basically a path. Really, the path for CTV in here is going to be with grocers and giving CPG brands a chance to really explore upper funnel opportunities and also other categories with low e-com penetration rates.
I want to make sure I'm getting that stat you just mentioned right. So you're saying that a huge portion of CTV dollars will come from retail media, but not a ton of retail media dollars are actually going to CTV?
That's correct. And that's largely because of something that Andrew alluded to earlier, which is just that the sort of bedrock of retail media ad spending at the moment is sponsored search, which is just going to continue to grow so healthily over the coming years that it will prevent CTV's share of retail from growing too much bigger because it has this added cushion.
Well, I mean, I think this is the beginnings of something that's really transformative to advertising and marketing, because it's TV ads, which CPGs have always lived on those, but TV ads have always lacked measurability. And we're getting to a point now where we're going to be able to bring in closed loop measurement to these TV-like ads. And the biggest constraint right now is inventory. We're starting to ramp up a lot more ad-supported inventory, but it's going to take some time for that transition to streaming TV to continue and for more ad inventory to become available. So it's just going to take some time. I think we have it at under $1 billion this year, but something like over $5 billion by 2027. A nice number, but not game changing. But what happens after that? It's probably going to hit a bit more of a hockey stick and kind of transform the way that we think of TV advertising, particularly in the CPG sector.
Yeah, absolutely. It's painting a very complex, woven net here. We're expecting retail media spend to make up a fifth of US digital media ad spend by the end of 2026. That's huge for such a young market. And I think that CTV potential definitely has a lot to do with that. There's one last thing I want to touch on before we move on to some predictions, which is how social networks play a role within retail media. We have social network ad spend in the US forecasted to grow really slowly this year, just above 3%. But social networks are definitely intrinsically tied into retail media ad spend. Max, can you tell me more about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that starting with the anemic growth in social is really important, right? I mean, social was this kind of rocket ship for most of the past decade. And a big reason for it was they had a lot of kind of easy paths to healthy incremental growth. So there was this constant, trend of more people, joining more social networks and spending more time with them. And that really crested or peaked in 2020 when we were all trapped in our houses and in front of our phone screens and basically had nothing else to do. But after that pandemic lifted, or the fever of that broke, a lot of people, it seems, have kind of gotten to the point of saying, I think I've got enough social in my life. And it's not that they're deleting the apps, but the amount of time spent with them is not growing. If you look at some related forecasts we've done, the time spent among existing users of every social network in the US is either flat or going down, except for TikTok. But, that means people are basically, not spending more time with Snapchat or Instagram or Facebook. And so that significantly presses down on the growth opportunities for Meta and Pinterest and all the rest of them. And that's sort of changing their attitude toward partnering with players like retail media networks. And I think that, this comes at a moment too when retail media networks, as Andrew alluded to earlier, are in really desperate need of offsite supply and proven formats and channels. And so, that's a big, easy win right there. And then also too, the retailers in many cases have the kind of engineering capability and appetite to plug into something like Meta's conversion API. And so that allows for much more, as you say, sort of closed loop measurement and an easy path to tying all this spending together, which is something that's increasingly important as we move on.
And Meta and social, one last point here, they had the closed loop measurement apparatus, and that was totally kneecapped by Apple's ATT initiative. So they lost a lot of that signal for targeting and measurement. And this is one way to help plug that gap. And it's the closed loop, to me, to the history of digital advertising that brings dollars online. I find the right audiences, I put money in, and I get efficient returns out of it, and I can keep investing it until I stop getting those returns. And that got lost for a while with Meta and social, and retail media is providing it. So if you can connect, really, the relationship makes sense. One has the inventory, the other's got the data. It probably makes sense that they come together now.
100%.
I think closed loop is a great topic to close off this second segment. Let's keep moving into our third segment, Red Hot Retail. This is our guests' opportunity to give us their very specific and potentially risky predictions on a topic. The predictions can be mild, medium, spicy, or extra hot. The higher the spice level, the riskier the prediction. Our guests will tell me what spice level to expect and then share their prediction. Today, Andrew and Max are sharing 4 predictions for the future of retail media. Max, why don't you go first by giving me a spice level and a prediction?
Sure. I'm going to kick things off with something mild, something that, even your spice-sensitive grandmother would, be comfortable eating. And that's that retail media ad spending will surpass linear TV ad spending before it figures its measurement situation out. And I say that partly because our own forecast shows that retail media will exceed linear TV in 2025, which is, pretty soon. But also just because the on-site spending opportunities are robust enough and plentiful enough that I think that things will just get there on their own in the next couple of years. One of the things that we haven't talked about much, but also figures into why retail media is growing so fast, is that there's already scaled buyer-seller relationships in place, right? So, when Meta or Google first started building out their ad businesses, obviously it was different eras of digital, but one of the sort of things that they had to do was they had to attract, hundreds, then thousands, then millions of advertisers onto their platforms. And thanks to the marketplace that Amazon and Walmart operate, thanks to the, joint business partnerships that lots of grocers have with CPG brands, those relationships exist already. They're maybe not like fit together as perfectly as they should be to get business started, that day, but they're close enough. And so I think that that's something that we're going to see happen pretty quickly.
Yeah. Although those relationships existing, I think also feeds back into what Andrew was saying about retail media being something like a tax for CPG brands.
100%.
I still agree with this prediction. Agree it's pretty mild. Thank you for sharing it. Andrew, why don't you give us another spice level and another prediction?
I'm going to start off with mild. Also, maybe banana pepper level.
Good.
This is that Shopify, I believe, is going to make a much bigger splash by evolving their retail media network into more of an ad network. So let me give you some background first. So Shopify to me is the one player out there where I just look at them and I say, who should be a much bigger player among RMNs that is not? And it's Shopify. I mean, they represent over 10% of e-commerce sales, would be second only to Amazon. And they just have Shopify audiences as their product, and they're not really making a lot of noise about it either. And it's basically using that transaction data to plug into Facebook and Google to reach audiences. They've started to make some moves more recently around the Shop app to make it more of a shopping destination. We talked about how the 1.0 retail media money was search ads. They haven't been a player in search ads. And I think that that's the path that they're going down, is to try and start to build out a marketplace so that they can have much more detailed shopping and buying behavior data, maybe increase scale. I'm not exactly sure what they're trying to do with all of it, but I just feel like there's something coming. So when I think about the back half of the year, like who's going to take it up a level in their RMN offering, I keep thinking about and looking at Shopify.
Yeah, I mean, my wheels have been spinning on this one, and definitely feel free to correct me if you disagree on this, but a lot of YouTubers and content creators sell stuff via Shopify or partner with Shopify. I wonder what sort of potential there would be between Shopify and something as big as YouTube here.
Yeah, there's something going on. Like Shopify mixes really well with the social commerce space, social environments, YouTube, creators, influencers, all these things, right? It's like, it is kind of a unique spot in e-commerce, and they just haven't like pulled the pieces together yet, but there's something there. So I'm kind of curious to see what it's going to be. I have to think they're up to something.
Okay, very solid banana pepper level prediction. Let's see if we can turn up the heat a bit. Max, why don't you tell me your next spice level, your next prediction?
I've got something spicy for you, and that's that Amazon will acquire Pinterest. This was something that I first started thinking about when Pinterest and Amazon announced that Amazon would be able to sell Pinterest's ad inventory through their pipes. And it just seems like something that, like I said, it's spicy. It's not a fait accompli or anything, but Amazon has been trying for years to build a sort of social layer to its product. Everyone probably remembers Amazon Spark and how little traction that got, and their attempts at sort of adding a social component to the live stream shopping, which hasn't really worked either. So, instead of trying to build something, why not buy a huge source of offsite supply and a, scaled laboratory where they can figure out how social and search can work together more effectively? It seems pretty sensible to me, but, I'm not the one working in their investment division.
Yeah, Pinterest accounts for over $2 billion in U.S. ad revenues right now. They make up more than 3% of U.S. social ad revenues in the U.S. not a small number. Would an Amazon acquisition of Pinterest ever be allowed to go through?
That's a good question. I think that it's possible. Lena Khan is definitely someone who scrutinizes these kinds of deals much more closely than her predecessors did. But I think you could argue that, it wouldn't introduce any kind of anti-competitive, dynamic into either marketplace. So I don't think it would necessarily get blocked by any regulators.
There's no market share dominance at play here. And Amazon has acquired MGM, which is a content company. So as long as the player is not big enough, I agree. It's a partnership that makes a lot of sense because Pinterest drives a lot of value in terms of moving people through the funnel, and then they never get credit for it because you don't get people to convert. Amazon can help them convert and give them the measurement apparatus. Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Okay, Pinterest CEO Bill Reddy, if you're listening to this podcast, we have some ideas for you. Andrew, why don't you give us our final spice level, our final prediction?
Okay, last one, also spicy, ghost pepper, we'll call it. This is that, and I made this prediction on a webinar a week or so ago, but it's that I see a lot of potential for Microsoft to acquire Instacart. Microsoft has been moving into a lot of different areas in advertising, and retail media is one of them. How they're playing today, they acquired Promote IQ to provide some tech for retailers, and they've also just been doing a lot of stuff on the store digitization front, which is where a lot of in-store retail media will play out in the future. I think it's a great place for Microsoft to play. The other player who wants to do this is Amazon, but no retailer wants to start forking over their data to Amazon in terms of what they're doing in store. So Microsoft has the credibility as a more agnostic player. Instacart, their strategy has shifted towards connected stores and providing store digitization. They have a very strong retail media business already that they're only going to continue to evolve. And their valuation has also suffered quite a bit over the last couple of years. And they've been trying to exit and can't quite find that window. I think the tenor is starting to change a little bit. And I do think there's a bit of more positive trajectory where they can IPO. But if somebody comes along with deep pockets and a really nice offer, they would also take that too. And I just think that it would make a lot of sense. One last detail here is that Instacart just announced a new capability to use OpenAI for search and integrating it into their experience so that people can basically come up with personalized recipes for them. So the fact that they have kind of common partners with OpenAI also makes me think that there is potential for synergy there.
Yeah, that relationship is already there to some extent.
Yeah,
Microsoft has like a $10 billion US ad footprint. Instacart's is closer to $1 billion. Amazon sort of already set up a playbook for acquiring a grocery company in the US. Microsoft would just sort of be following that, but in this retail media 2.0 era.
Yep, but importantly, not a retailer itself. So Microsoft wouldn't be competing. It would be a platform that enables the ecosystem of retailers.
Yeah, and continue having that identity as a tech company. All right, well, that is all we have time for today. Pro subscribers can read more about retail media in Max's recent retail media report on our website at insiderintelligence.com. Thank you for joining me today, Andrew.
Thanks, Sarah.
And thanks for being here, Max.
I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Please give us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on Instagram at behindthenumbers_podcast. Thank you to our listeners and to Victoria, who edits the podcast and still owes me an autograph from her dog Chester. We'll be back next Wednesday with another episode of Reimagining Retail, an eMarketer podcast. And tomorrow you can join Marcus for another episode of the Behind the Numbers Daily.